The woman who squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Let it go," was the same woman who'd been sleeping in my bed on the nights I worked the late shift. She brought me lavender candles when I cried. She poured my wine while she poured through my secrets. And when my husband screamed, "Apologize or get out," she had no idea I was about to end everything with one sentence. Welcome to Astra Stories. Have you ever sold houses for a living and completely missed every single sign that your own home was falling apart? Not the foundation or the roof or the plumbing, the actual life inside it, the marriage, the trust. The person sleeping next to you who smelled like someone else's lavender and came home 2 hours after the gym closed and looked you dead in the eye and said, "Traffic." Yeah, that was me. For 7 years. But the thing is, it didn't start with the lavender. And it didn't start with the lease agreement I found folded behind the vehicle registration in my husband's glove box with a name on it that made my blood go cold. It started at a dinner table, a Sunday supper table in my mother-in-law's dining room with a crack running down the middle that she covered with a tablecloth she'd had since 2006. So let's start there. My name is Vivian Torres. I'm 34 years old and I sell houses for Coldwell Banker in Wake County, North Carolina. Specifically, I sell houses in the new subdivisions popping up around Raleigh like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The ones with the open floor plans and the farmhouse sinks and the accent walls that everyone on HGTV told America they needed. I drive a Lexus RX with a scratch on the passenger door from a Whole Foods parking lot incident that I keep telling myself I'll get buffed out. I have not gotten it buffed out. It's been 14 months. I tell you this because it matters later that I'm the kind of person who reads closing documents for a living. Who catches the misplaced decimal on page 47 of a mortgage disclosure that would have cost a client $11,000? Who can walk into a house and tell you within 6 seconds whether the sellers are hiding water damage behind fresh paint? I read people and I read paperwork. That's what I do. Except when it came to the people I loved, I was completely, catastrophically blind. My husband, Grant Palmer, was 37, project manager at a commercial construction company that handled developments across the Triangle area. He had a handshake that could close a deal, and a jaw that could have sold toothpaste in a magazine ad, and exactly one remarkable talent in this life, which was the ability to be physically present in a room where something terrible was happening, and somehow not be part of it. If conflict avoidance were a professional sport, Grant Palmer would have had an endorsement deal. Every first Sunday of the month, the Palmer family gathered at Kathleen's house for supper. Kathleen Palmer, my mother-in-law, 63 years old, retired school librarian, made a pot roast that could have been classified as a building material. I'm talking about a roast so dry it could have been used to insulate an attic. But you didn't say that. You ate it. You told her it was wonderful. And if you were smart, you asked for seconds and complimented the gravy, which was actually decent because it came from a jar that she hid in the trash before anyone arrived. I was not always smart. That May supper was the one that started everything, though I didn't know it at the time. The table was set the way it always was. Kathleen's good plates, the ones with the little blue flowers around the rim that she only used for Sunday supper and Easter. The tablecloth, cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges, draped over that crack in the table that everyone knew about but nobody mentioned. 7 chairs, 7 place settings. The ceiling fan clicking on every third rotation because Grant had been promising to fix it since the previous November. I made the mistake of commenting on the pot roast seasoning. I didn't criticize it. I want to be very clear about that. I said, and I quote, "You know what might give this a really nice depth? A little bit of smoked paprika and maybe some Worcestershire in the braising liquid." I said it the way you'd suggest a paint color to a client. Gently, professionally, with a smile. You would have thought I had insulted Kathleen's dead grandmother. Meredith set down her fork. Meredith Palmer Hicks, my sister-in-law, 40 years old, office manager at a dental practice in Cary, full-time authority on everything I did wrong, and part-time guardian of the Palmer family bloodline. She drove a white Suburban with a Live, Laugh, Love decal on the back window, and I promise you, the irony was completely lost on her. She leaned back in her chair with that look she had, the one where she tilted her chin up like she was about to deliver a verdict from the bench of a courtroom she'd built entirely in her own mind. Her eyes locked on mine and she said, loud enough for every person at that table to hear, "Vivian, sweetie, nobody asked you." The table went quiet. Kathleen reached for the bread basket. Doug, Meredith's husband, studied his green beans like they contained classified information. And Grant, my husband, the man I'd been married to for 7 years, the man whose shirts I ironed, and whose dentist appointments I scheduled, and whose mother's pot roast I choked down every first Sunday with a smile, sat there and did absolutely nothing. He cracked his knuckles under the table. That thing he did when he knew something was happening and had already decided he wasn't going to be involved in it. He took a sip of his sweet tea. He looked at a spot on the wall approximately 3 feet above my head, and he said nothing. Not one word. Now, the person sitting across from me at that table, the person who saw my face go tight and my jaw clench and my fingers curl around my fork like I was considering using it as a weapon, was Cassidy. Cassidy Lane, my next-door neighbor for 3 years, my closest friend in the entire Raleigh metro area. The woman who showed up on my porch with a handmade lavender candle every single time something went wrong in my life, which by that summer was basically every other Tuesday. She was 35, ran a small yoga studio in a shopping plaza on Glenwood Avenue, the kind of place with exposed brick and succulents in the window and a chalkboard sign out front that said things like, "Breathe in peace, breathe out chaos." She drove a white Toyota RAV4 with a Namaste bumper sticker and a car seat in the back from when she used to nanny on weekends before the studio took off. Cassidy had this way about her. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every kid's soccer game in a 3-house radius. She was the person who organized the cul-de-sac holiday cookie exchange. The person who brought homemade lavender candles wrapped in brown craft paper with little handwritten notes that said things like, "You've got this, Mama," or "Breathe, you're doing amazing." She smelled like essential oils and good intentions, and when she walked into a room, people relaxed. That was her gift. She made you feel like you weren't alone, even when your own husband couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone long enough to notice you were drowning. That night at Kathleen's, after Meredith delivered her ruling from the bench, Cassidy noticed Kathleen struggling with a stack of plates before anyone else did. She was out of her chair and across the room before Grant or Doug even registered that Kathleen needed help. She complimented the peach cobbler. She asked for the recipe, and Kathleen lit up like someone had handed her a bouquet of peonies on a random Wednesday. Everyone loved Cassidy. I loved Cassidy. Her husband Owen was there too. Owen Lane, 36, head football coach at a high school in Garner. Big guy, quiet, the kind of man who held doors open for everyone and said yes ma'am to Kathleen, and spent most of these dinners studying his plate like he was reviewing game film. He worked long hours. Practice, film sessions, Friday night games, Saturday recruiting. When he was home, Cassidy said he mostly sat in the garage with his headphones on, watching game tape on his laptop. She said they were like roommates, but Owen was solid, dependable, the kind of man who'd fix your garbage disposal on a Sunday morning without being asked and refuse to let you pay him. He just didn't talk much. Doug Hicks, Meredith's husband, was the other one at the table worth mentioning, 42, trying to open his own dental practice in Cary. He had 3 associates and a mountain of startup debt, and the particular brand of quiet desperation that comes with betting everything on a business that hasn't turned a profit yet. He spent most dinners nodding at whatever Meredith said and looking like a man who'd made peace with the fact that silence was easier than the alternative. After supper, while the Palmer family did their usual 40-minute porch goodbye that I'd stopped participating in around year 4, Cassidy walked me to my car. She leaned against the Lexus and shook her head slowly, the way you do when you've witnessed something outrageous and you're still processing it. "You handled that with more grace than I would have," she said. I wanted to throw the cobbler at her. I laughed, actually laughed, and for a second, standing in Kathleen's driveway with the crickets going and the porch light turning everything softer than it actually was, I felt like somebody saw me. Like somebody in this entire sprawling Palmer universe actually understood what it felt like to sit at that table and be treated like an intruder in a family I'd been part of for 7 years. Cassidy squeezed my arm. "You're worth 10 of her, Viv. Don't let her get in your head." I drove home feeling almost okay. Almost. That lasted about 11 minutes. Because on the drive back, Grant cracked his knuckles on the steering wheel, that sound I'd come to associate with the specific flavor of disappointment he reserved exclusively for me, and said, "Why can't you just be more like Cassidy? She gets along with everyone." I didn't answer. I reached over and turned up the radio. Some country song about a woman leaving a man who didn't deserve her, which felt a little too on the nose for a Tuesday night in May, but I wasn't in a position to appreciate the irony yet. Some battles aren't worth the energy. Some battles you don't even realize are battles until it's way too late. And some battles, the really dangerous ones, aren't even happening where you think they are. You're watching the front door while someone's climbing through the window you left open because you trusted them with the key. All right, hold on a second. Before I keep going, if you're listening to this and you haven't hit subscribe yet, do me a favor and tap that button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm serious. I read every single one of those and it genuinely makes my whole day. Thank you. Okay, so June. I pulled up the Chase app on a Tuesday morning in June while standing in my kitchen eating a protein bar over the sink because I'd overslept by 22 minutes and had a showing at 9:15 in a subdivision off Leesville Road where the sellers had priced their split level. About 40,000 too high, and I was going to have to smile through explaining that to a couple who'd already picked out curtains. My hair was doing something I couldn't explain but didn't have time to fix. My blazer had a coffee stain on the left cuff that I was planning to hide by keeping my arms crossed during the walkthrough. I was, in other words, having a completely normal Tuesday. And then I saw the number. $5,200. Gone. Transferred out of our joint savings on June 3rd to an account I didn't recognize at a credit union I'd never heard of. Southern Wake Federal. I stared at it long enough for the protein bar to go stale in my mouth. Then I stared at it some more. I called Grant from the Coldwell Banker parking lot at 8:47 in the morning, sitting in my Lexus with the engine running because the air conditioning in a North Carolina June takes approximately 4 minutes to transition from hairdryer aimed at your face to something resembling breathable air. He picked up on the third ring. I could hear a job site behind him, the beeping of equipment backing up. He told me it was for Doug, Meredith's husband. The dental practice was hemorrhaging money, he said. Payroll gap. Doug needed to cover his 3 associates' salaries for 2 weeks until a line of credit came through. Grant said he'd get it back. He said it the way a man says something he rehearsed in the shower that morning, casually, like he was telling me he'd picked up milk on the way home. Like $5,200 was a rounding error and not the exact amount we'd set aside for property taxes in October. I wanted to believe him. I need you to understand that. Because the alternative, that my husband was lying to my face about $5,000 while I sat in a parking lot with coffee on my sleeve and a showing in 30 minutes, meant something I wasn't ready to look at yet. So I did what you do when you're 34 and still trying to convince yourself that your marriage is a house with good bones that just needs some cosmetic updates. I called someone I trusted. Cassidy picked up on the second ring. She was between classes at the studio, and I could hear that ambient yoga playlist she always had going in the background. The one with the singing bowls and the rain sounds that made you feel like you were calling a spa instead of a strip mall on Glenwood Avenue. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was one of her gifts. Then she confirmed it. Doug's been stressed, she said. Meredith was venting about it at yoga last Thursday. Something about maybe having to let one of the associates go. It's been really bad, Viv. See, that was the thing about Cassidy. She always had corroboration. She always had a second source. A piece of information from somewhere else that made whatever you were worried about feel validated and directed. Yes, something is off. And here's exactly where the problem is. Not here. Not with your husband. Over there. With Meredith. With Doug. It's always them. She suggested I start documenting everything. Every time Meredith asks Grant for money, every transaction that doesn't look right, keep a spreadsheet, she said. You're a numbers person, Viv. Use that. So I did. I opened a Google sheet on my work computer, hiding it behind a tab of MLS listings, like I was 16 again, hiding AIM from my parents, and started logging every withdrawal, every excuse, every date. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, Grant's explanation. Column D, source of verification. I color-coded it. Green for verified, yellow for suspicious, red for outright nonsense. I tell you this because later it's going to matter that I'm the kind of person who builds spreadsheets when she's scared, not because I'm some kind of forensic accountant. I'm a realtor. I spend my days reading closing documents and catching misplaced decimals and arguing with title companies about survey discrepancies. You develop a certain sensitivity to when the numbers don't add up, a certain itch in the back of your brain that won't go away until every column balances. That month, the columns did not balance. Another $2,600 vanished on June 28th, same credit union, same pattern. That made $7,800 in less than 4 weeks. I was lying in bed at night doing math on the ceiling fan. At this rate, our savings would be empty by Christmas. We'd started the year with just under $23,000. Not wealthy, not struggling, just the kind of cushion that lets you sleep without doing arithmetic on the ceiling fan blades at 2 in the morning. Now that cushion was getting thinner by the week. My supervisor at Coldwell Banker, a woman named Diane who wore reading glasses on a chain and had opinions about everyone's lunch choices, had already flagged a missed follow-up on a listing in North Hills. I'd forgotten to send the comparative market analysis to a client who was already nervous about pricing. That wasn't me. I didn't forget things. I had a color-coded spreadsheet for my color-coded spreadsheets. Something was slipping, and I could feel it, like a stack of papers slowly sliding off the edge of a desk. Rosa Gutierrez, the only co-worker I trusted enough to eat lunch with regularly, had covered for me on the CMA, pulling the comps herself during her break and sending them under my name. She set a paper cup of break room coffee on my desk. Terrible coffee. The kind that tasted like someone had filtered hot water through a burnt sock. She told me she was worried about me, that whatever was going on at home was starting to show up at work. I told her I was fine. Which is what you say when you are categorically not fine but cannot afford to fall apart in a real estate office at 1:30 in the afternoon when you have a closing at 3. That night, I updated the spreadsheet. Column D, source of verification, for both entries now read the same thing. Cassidy Lane, confirmed via yoga class conversation with Meredith. She told me exactly where to look, and I looked exactly where she pointed. That was the problem. That Friday evening, Cassidy showed up at my front door with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and her laptop tucked under her arm like she was arriving for a board meeting she intended to run. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater that said, "Inhale confidence, exhale doubt" across the chest in cursive, which under different circumstances might have made me roll my eyes, but right then it felt like exactly the kind of energy I needed, standing in my doorway with unwashed hair and a husband who'd been avoiding eye contact for 3 days. She walked in, set the wine on the counter, and pulled a lavender candle out of her bag. Not a store-bought candle. A handmade one, poured into a little ceramic jar with a cotton wick and a label that said "Calm" in Cassidy's handwriting. She made them herself, sold them at the studio and at a booth at the Raleigh Flea Market on second Saturdays. They were actually beautiful. Smelled like a field in Provence, if Provence were located in a shopping plaza between a nail salon and a Subway. She lit the candle on my coffee table, poured 2 glasses of wine, and sat down on my couch like she was settling in for a long night. And she was. We both were. "Show me everything," she said. I opened the Chase app on my phone and my laptop simultaneously, because I am the kind of person who uses 2 screens to look at the same bank account. Cassidy leaned in close enough that I could smell the lavender on her, not just from the candle, but from her skin, her hair, that essential oil blend she wore like other women wore perfume. She pointed at the screen with a freshly manicured fingernail, soft pink, and started walking me through the transactions one by one. "There," she said, tapping the laptop screen. $142 at a dental supply company in Cary. That's Doug's vendor. And this one, $87 at a gas station on Highway 55, right near the lot where Doug is building out the practice space. She scrolled further. And look, $300 at a restaurant in Durham. That's probably a client dinner for the practice investors. She connected every dot. She drew lines between transactions like she was mapping constellations, and every single star pointed in the same direction. Doug, Meredith, the dental practice. The family that was bleeding my savings dry while I ate terrible pot roast once a month and smiled about it. "See?" she said, sitting back with her wine glass balanced on her knee. "It's all connected to them." I saw it because she showed me exactly where to look. We spent 3 hours on that couch. The Pinot Grigio disappeared. The lavender candle burned down to a pool of wax that flickered shadows across the ceiling. I built out the spreadsheet while Cassidy narrated, adding columns I hadn't thought of: vendor names, locations, frequency, estimated connection to Doug's practice. She even suggested I cross-reference the withdrawal dates with Grant's work calendar to see if the transfers happened on days he was in the office or on the road. "You're a numbers person," she said again. The same thing she'd said on the phone. "This is what you're good at, Viv." Don't let them make you feel crazy for using the one skill that's going to prove you right. I felt validated. I felt furious. And I felt grateful. So grateful that I had someone on my side who could sit on my couch on a Friday night and help me make sense of the chaos. Someone who wasn't scared of the numbers. Someone who wasn't Grant, cracking his knuckles and telling me I was overreacting. Someone who showed up with wine and a candle and said, "Show me everything," and actually meant it. She smelled like lavender and loyalty. Later I'd learn only one of those was real. This has nothing to do with anything, but Cassidy made the best lavender candles I've ever encountered. I'm talking about candles that should have had their own waiting list. She used soy wax and organic essential oils and hand-poured each one in her garage while listening to a true crime podcast at full volume, which is a detail that becomes significantly more ironic in hindsight. She brought one over every time something went wrong in my life. The calm candle was for general stress. She had a restore candle for bad weeks, a breathe candle for really bad weeks, and a rise candle that she said was for when you'd hit rock bottom and needed to start climbing. By August, I'd have the complete collection. Anyway, that wine night changed things, not because I learned anything new about the money. Everything Cassidy showed me, I could have found myself if I'd looked long enough, but she gave me a framework, a narrative, a villain. The money was going to Doug and Meredith. Grant was being manipulated by his family. I was the only sane person in this equation, and Cassidy was my proof. That's the thing about a really good lie. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to feel like the truth you were already looking for. The following Monday, I sat down at my desk at Coldwell Banker before the office opened. Rosa wasn't in yet. Diane was in the conference room arguing with a printer. I had 17 minutes of silence, and I used them to update every column in my spreadsheet with the data Cassidy and I had compiled Friday night. I saved it behind my MLS tab, right next to a listing for a 4-bedroom colonial in Wakefield that had been sitting on the market for 91 days because the owners refused to replace the carpet that smelled like cat. Rosa came in at 8:45 with 2 coffees from the cafe on Hillsborough Street. She set one on my desk without asking, the way she always did, and gave me a look that lasted about 2 seconds longer than a normal look. The kind of look that says, "I can see you're drowning, but I'm going to wait until you're ready to talk about it." "You okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said. She didn't push. That was Rosa. She had this way of leaving space for you to fall apart on your own timeline, which is the most generous thing a coworker can do when the alternative is falling apart in front of a woman named Diane who will absolutely bring it up at the next team meeting. I entered 3 new listings that morning and didn't think about the spreadsheet once. That was a lie. I thought about it constantly. I thought about the $7,800 that had walked out of my life and into Doug's dental practice. I thought about Meredith sitting at that table with her chin tilted up, telling me nobody asked me. And I thought about Cassidy on my couch, pointing at numbers with her pink fingernail, building a case file that I would later discover was designed from the very first column to point me in exactly the wrong direction. But I didn't know that yet. In June, I still believed in lavender candles. My husband, this man, Grant Palmer, the man who once forgot to pick me up from an outpatient procedure at WakeMed because he was at a Buffalo Brothers watching the Panthers lose by 23 points, came home on a Wednesday evening in the first week of July with a glossy brochure for a kitchen renovation. He spread it out on the counter like he was presenting blueprints for a cathedral. Quartz countertops, custom cabinetry, a farmhouse sink with a brushed gold faucet. And the centerpiece, the thing he kept tapping with his finger like a kid showing you his Christmas list, a waterfall island, you know the kind, where the countertop material cascades down the sides of the island like a frozen sheet of marble. The kind of island that gets 6,000 likes on Pinterest and costs more than some people's cars. $35,000. According to the contractor he'd already called, before mentioning it to me. Before checking whether we had $35,000 to spend, which we did not, because $7,800 of our savings had recently taken a field trip to Doug Hicks's dental supply vendors and hadn't come back. I stood at the counter and looked at the brochure and looked at my husband and performed a quick mental calculation that did not require a spreadsheet. We were short $7,800, and he wanted to spend $35,000 on a kitchen we cooked in maybe 4 times a week, because the rest of the time we ate Kathleen's pot roast or ordered Thai food from the Kleitz place on Falls of Neuse Road that always forgot the spring rolls. "Grant," I said, "we're almost 8,000 short in savings and you want to remodel the kitchen?" He called me obsessive, said I couldn't let anything breathe, said I treated our finances like an audit and our marriage like a transaction, and that maybe, just maybe, it would be nice to come home to a wife who got excited about something instead of immediately reaching for the calculator. This man couldn't remember our anniversary 3 years running, but had opinions about quartz versus marble waterfall edges. Sure, Grant. Sure. I went to bed at 8:30 that night and reorganized my nightstand drawer until my fingernails hurt. That's what I do when I'm angry. Some people scream. Some people cry. Some people throw things. I organize small spaces with military precision and pretend I'm fine. By 9:15, my nightstand contained a perfectly aligned stack of 3 books I hadn't read, a tube of hand cream positioned label forward, 2 hair ties sorted by color, and a phone charger coiled into a circle so precise it could have been displayed in a museum of obsessive behavior. I was fine. I was completely fine. Here's the part that didn't click until months later. About 3 weeks before Grant brought home that brochure, Cassidy had been at our house for dinner. Just a casual weeknight thing, tacos from the counter because I'd gotten home late from a showing. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding her wine glass, looking out at the backyard where the light was coming through the trees in that golden way it does in North Carolina in early summer. And she said, almost dreamily, like she was talking to herself, "You know what would be absolutely gorgeous in here? A waterfall island. Right there, in the center, with pendant lights above it and a little reading nook in the corner by the window." Grant had looked up from his taco. His eyes lit up. He actually set down his fork, which was not something Grant Palmer did mid-taco, unless something genuinely interested him. "That would be incredible," he said. Cassidy had smiled. She'd even texted him a contractor's name the next morning. I'd seen the text on his phone and thought nothing of it. She was being helpful. She was always being helpful. She was designing a kitchen she planned to cook in. I just didn't know it yet. The July Sunday supper was the following weekend. Kathleen made chicken this time, which represented genuine culinary progress, and Meredith was in peak form. She spent the first 20 minutes of dinner talking about a trip she and Doug were planning to the Bahamas for their anniversary in November. A resort in Nassau, all-inclusive, 7 nights, which was interesting. Because if Doug's dental practice was bleeding payroll money so badly that my husband had to funnel $7,800 from our savings to keep the lights on, a 7-night, all-inclusive trip to the Bahamas seemed like an unusual financial priority. I made the mistake of pointing this out. Gently, I thought. I said something like, "That sounds amazing. I'm glad things are looking up with the practice if you guys can swing a trip like that." It was not received gently. Meredith set down her fork with the precision of a judge setting down a gavel. She stared at me across the table with an expression that could have curdled milk at 30 paces. "Some people," she said, and I knew from the way she said "some people" that she meant me, specifically me, only me, marry into a family and think they get to audit everyone else's choices. There it was, the microaggression wrapped in a family dinner napkin. Not our kind, doesn't belong here, married in, the outsider. 7 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases and Sunday suppers, and I was still the woman who'd married into the Palmer family and didn't know her place. Kathleen reached for the salt. Grant took a sip of sweet tea. Doug studied his chicken like it was written in a language he was still learning, and Cassidy, across the table, caught my eye and made a face. Eyebrows up, lips pressed together, the universal expression for, "Can you believe this woman?" I felt a little less alone. That was the trick, of course. That was always the trick. The 4th of July block party in our cul-de-sac was the kind of event that looked perfect from a drone shot. Red, white, and blue streamers taped to mailboxes. Folding tables lined up in the Petersons' driveway with aluminum trays of pulled pork and coleslaw and corn on the cob wrapped in foil. Kids running through a sprinkler someone had set up on the median strip. Sparklers. Citronella candles. A Bluetooth speaker playing a playlist that alternated between Lee Greenwood and Luke Combs like it couldn't decide whether to be patriotic or just Southern. Cassidy had organized the whole thing. Naturally. She'd made a sign-up sheet in the neighborhood group chat 3 weeks earlier and assigned everyone a dish with the diplomatic precision of a United Nations summit. She was wearing a white sundress and red earrings and was holding somebody's toddler on her hip when I arrived. looking exactly like a woman who should be on the cover of a magazine called People Who Have Their Lives Together Quarterly. I was not on the cover of that magazine. I was wearing shorts I'd found on the bedroom floor that morning and carrying a store-bought fruit tray from Harris Teeter that I'd transferred to a ceramic platter so it would look homemade, which is a level of deception I'm comfortable admitting to because it is the least significant lie that was told that summer. I had a plan. A stupid plan. Looking back, but a plan. I waited until Doug Hicks was on his third Yuengling and cornered him by the cooler. Just casual, neighborly, friendly. I handed him a beer he hadn't asked for and leaned against the Petersons' truck like I was just enjoying the fireworks, which hadn't started yet because the sun was still up, and that's not how fireworks work, but I needed a prop for my fake casualness. I asked him how the dental practice was going, mentioned, lightly, like I was making conversation, that Grant had moved close to $5,000 from our savings and said it was to help him bridge a payroll gap. Doug's face did something complicated. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish that had been asked a question about tax law. He looked over my shoulder like he was hoping a rescue helicopter might materialize from behind the Petersons' garage. He mumbled something about appreciating the help, said things were turning around, and when I pushed one step further, asked if he remembered the specific amount because the numbers I was tracking didn't quite match up. He set down his beer on the cooler lid and said he had to go check on Meredith. He walked away so fast, he left his Yuengling sweating on the Coleman. He told Grant. Of course he told Grant. These men had a communication system for crisis management that was more efficient than anything they'd ever demonstrated in their actual marriages. Doug probably had his phone out before he reached the end of the driveway. That night, after the fireworks had fizzled out and the cul-de-sac smelled like sulfur and lighter fluid and someone's burned hot dog, Grant came through the front door a different person. He slammed his keys on the counter. We had a little ceramic bowl by the front door, a hand-painted thing from a craft fair in Asheville that his cousin had given us as a housewarming gift 5 years ago. Blue glaze with a magnolia painted on the inside. The keys hit it so hard it cracked right down the center, a clean split from rim to base, and he turned on me before the two halves had even stopped rocking. You're going behind my back interrogating my family at a block party. I told him I'd asked one question. One. A question he still hadn't answered, by the way, which was where specifically $7,800 had gone, because the numbers I was looking at didn't match the story he'd given me. He didn't have an answer for that, so he did what he always did. He went loud, went broad, and made the argument about my personality instead of his math. I was paranoid. I was controlling. I was the reason family events felt like depositions. I was suffocating him. I was treating him like a suspect instead of a husband. He delivered this speech standing in our kitchen with the cracked bowl between us on the counter and a vein in his neck I'd never noticed before pulsing like it was trying to escape his body. And when he was done, when he'd run out of adjectives to describe what was wrong with me as a person, rather than addressing what was wrong with our bank account as a fact, he went to the living room and turned on ESPN and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. I picked up the two halves of the ceramic bowl. The magnolia was split right down the middle, half on each piece. I got the super glue from the junk drawer, the one next to the fridge that held batteries and takeout menus and a flashlight that hadn't worked since the previous hurricane season, and I glued it back together, held the pieces with my fingers for 3 minutes until the bond set. It held, mostly. There was a visible seam running through the magnolia where the glaze didn't quite line up anymore, and if you put your keys in it too hard, you could feel the halves shift slightly, like they remembered being broken. I was doing that a lot lately, holding together things that were already cracked and pretending the seams didn't show. Meredith texted Grant that night. I saw the preview on his lock screen when he left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered. Just the first line, glowing on the screen next to his toothbrush. I told you she'd be like this. Like what, Meredith? Like a woman who noticed nearly $8,000 walking out the door and had the audacity to ask where it went? Like a woman with a functioning bank app and enough self-respect to expect an answer? Sorry for having basic arithmetic skills and a problem with being lied to. The tension from that night sat in our house like humidity for the next week. We moved around each other in the kitchen like strangers in a hotel lobby. The only sounds were the refrigerator humming and the occasional cabinet door closing with just a little more force than necessary, the kind of passive-aggressive percussion that passes for communication when two people have stopped using words. I didn't call Cassidy that week. She texted twice, checking in, and I responded with the kind of short answers that should have signaled something but probably didn't. I was tired. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. The kind where your bones feel heavy and your brain feels like it's been running on a hamster wheel for 6 weeks and somebody forgot to oil the axle. On Saturday, I packed a bag and drove to my mother's apartment in Durham. 45 minutes on Interstate 40, with the windows down and the radio off and nothing but the sound of tires on asphalt and my own breathing. Because I couldn't stand the silence in my own house anymore. The silence that wasn't empty. The silence that was full of everything neither of us was willing to say. I came back from Durham on Sunday evening with my hair still smelling like my mother's fabric softener and a Tupperware container of arroz con pollo that she'd pressed into my hands at the door like she was sending me off to. Of war. My mother is the kind of woman who believes that most problems in life can be solved with enough rice and a firm conversation with God, and while I wasn't sure she was right about either of those things, the rice was excellent, and I was in no position to turn down comfort in any form. I pulled into the driveway and Cassidy was already there. Not in my driveway, on her front porch, watching, like she'd been waiting. She crossed the yard before I'd even turned off the engine, carrying a lavender candle in one hand and an iced chai latte from the coffee shop on Glenwood Avenue in the other. The candle was one of her Restore collection. The label was written in her handwriting, and there was a little sticky note attached that said, "You're stronger than you think." She handed me the chai through the car window and leaned against the Lexus the way she had after that first supper in May, arms crossed, head tilted, the universal posture of a woman who was ready to listen for as long as it took. "I heard him through the wall," she said, "the night of the block party. I almost came over. I hadn't realized the walls were that thin. Or maybe it wasn't the walls. Maybe Grant was just that loud." I sat on my front porch steps with the chai sweating in my hand and told her everything. The Doug confrontation by the cooler. The Yuengling left on the Coleman, the keys hitting the ceramic bowl, the crack running through the magnolia, the week of silence, the drive to Durham with the windows down and nothing on the radio. She shook her head slowly, told me I wasn't crazy, that I had every right to ask questions about my own money, but that going through Doug was risky. "These guys protect each other," she said, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and strategy. "Like a pack. You go after one of them, and the whole group circles up." She offered to do some digging herself, said Meredith had started coming to the Tuesday morning yoga class at the studio, the slow flow one for beginners, and that they'd been chatting after class. Nothing deep, just small talk, but enough that Cassidy thought she could ask some questions without it being obvious. Plant a seed here, water a conversation there, see what grew. I agreed. Of course I agreed. She was my best friend, my neighbor, the person who showed up with handmade candles and chai lattes on a Sunday evening when the rest of the world didn't care. The person who heard my husband yelling through the wall and almost came over. Why wouldn't I let her help? That Thursday, Cassidy reported back. She called me on my lunch break while I was sitting in my Lexus in the Coldwell Banker parking lot, eating a sad little salad from the Panera on Glenwood South. She said she'd been chatting with Meredith after yoga, pretending to plan a surprise for Grant's upcoming birthday in September, and during the conversation, Meredith had apparently bragged about how generous Grant had been lately. She said, and I quote, Cassidy told me, her voice dropping like she was sharing classified intelligence, "Grant really stepped up for Doug, always there when family needs him, unlike some people. That was a direct shot, fired from Meredith's mouth through Cassidy's phone into my ear while I sat in a parking lot with salad dressing on my thumb. I wrote the quote down in my spreadsheet that afternoon. Column D, source of verification, Cassidy Lane, July 28th, from Meredith Palmer Hicks, yoga class conversation. I highlighted it yellow because it confirmed the money was going to Doug, but also confirmed that Meredith viewed me as the problem, which meant this wasn't going to resolve itself through polite conversation at the next Sunday supper. I felt vindicated. I felt furious. And I felt grateful. That word keeps coming back, doesn't it? Grateful. I was so grateful to have someone feeding me information from behind enemy lines, someone who could slip into Meredith's circle and extract intelligence and bring it back to me wrapped in sympathy and chai lattes. Meanwhile, the money kept bleeding. Another $1,650 vanished on a Monday in late July, and by mid-August, another $1,950, same credit union, same pattern. That made $11,400 total. I was lying in bed doing math on the ceiling fan again, watching the blades go around and calculating how many months we had left before the account hit zero. At this rate, we'd be empty by Valentine's Day. Happy anniversary, Grant. I got you bankruptcy. We'd started the year with just under $23,000. That number used to make me feel safe. Not rich, not extravagant, just secure enough to handle a broken transmission or an emergency room visit or a quarter where my commissions dipped. Now, it was a countdown. At the office, things were getting worse. Diane had flagged another missed deadline, a contract amendment I'd forgotten to route to the title company on a closing in Apex. Rosa covered for me again, calling the title company herself and smooth-talking them through a 2-day extension that should have been unnecessary. She set another cup of terrible break-room coffee on my desk and sat on the corner of it, which she only did when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. Viv, whatever's happening at home, it's following you in here. I looked at the coffee. I looked at Rosa. She had this way of pausing before she spoke, not hesitating but creating space, like she was giving your situation room to breathe before she addressed it. It didn't feel like judgment. It felt like she was letting the gravity of the moment exist on its own terms before adding her voice to it. I know, I said. You need to get ahead of it, before Diane gets ahead of you. She wasn't wrong. Diane had already made a comment in the Monday meeting about attention to detail that was clearly aimed at me, despite being phrased as a general observation about team standards. The kind of corporate passive aggression that lets someone reprimand you while maintaining plausible deniability. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with $11,400 missing and a husband who thought the solution to our financial crisis was a waterfall island. I told Rosa I was handling it. She looked at me the way she always did when I said that, with the kind of patient skepticism that comes from watching someone say I'm fine enough times that the words have lost all structural integrity. She didn't push, but she didn't leave either. She sat on the corner of my desk and drank her terrible coffee and let the silence say what she was too kind to say out loud, which was that I wasn't handling anything, and we both knew it. And here's the part I didn't tell anyone. Not Rosa, not even Cassidy. Grant smelled different. I noticed it on a Saturday evening in late August when he came home from what he said was the gym, Planet Fitness on Capitol Boulevard, the one near the Target that always has a line at the self-checkout. He walked past me in the hallway and I caught something. Not cologne, not deodorant, something lighter, cleaner, an essential oil. Lavender, but sharper than the lavender I was used to. More concentrated. Like someone had rubbed it directly onto skin rather than lighting it in a candle. My husband did not use essential oils. My husband used Dove Men Plus Care body wash that I bought in bulk from Costco because I put it on the list and he was standing right there next to the cart. He'd been using the same body wash since before we met. The man had the grooming routine of someone who considered shampoo and body wash to be interchangeable products, which they are not, but that was a battle I'd stopped fighting around year 2. I told myself it was nothing. New gym, new soap dispensers, maybe Planet Fitness had switched suppliers. Maybe they'd upgraded to something lavender-scented in the showers because someone on their corporate wellness team decided that aromatherapy would improve member retention. People don't think about soap. But I did. I thought about it at 11 at night. I thought about it at 2 in the morning. I thought about it at 6:15 when I was brushing my teeth and staring at his bottle of Dove Men Plus Care sitting in the shower caddy, untouched. The fill line was exactly where it had been 3 days ago. I knew this because I am the kind of person who notices fill lines. I notice the water level in the Brita pitcher. I notice when the creamer in the fridge goes down faster than it should. I notice when a bottle of body wash that should be decreasing by 1/4 inch every 2 days hasn't moved in 72 hours. The body wash wasn't moving because he wasn't using it. He was showering somewhere else. The following week, I found a yoga mat in Grant's car, rolled up in the trunk, wedged behind a toolbox and a pair of work boots. A nice one, too, not a $15 mat from Walmart. This was a thick, professional-grade mat in a dark teal color with a mandala pattern embossed on the surface, the kind you'd find in a studio, the kind Cassidy sold at her shop. I held it up when he walked through the garage door that evening. He glanced at it with the rehearsed casualness of a man who'd been expecting the question. Oh, that. One of the guys on the project in Morrisville does yoga. Left it in my truck after a team-building thing last month. Keep forgetting to give it back. A team-building thing. At a commercial construction company. where the team consisted of project managers and electricians and concrete subcontractors. Sure, nothing says corporate bonding like downward dog in a hard hat. I mentioned the yoga mat to Cassidy the next day. She was watering her hostas in the front yard, wearing a tank top that said good vibes only, which, again, the irony. I was pretending to check my mailbox, which is the suburban equivalent of casually walking past someone's locker in high school, hoping they'll talk to you. She laughed. Lots of people do yoga now, Viv. Even construction guys. My Tuesday morning class has 2 guys from a roofing company. They're more flexible than half my regulars. She said it lightly, easily, the way you dismiss something that doesn't matter. And it worked for about 48 hours. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I was driving to a showing, a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood off Lynn Road, about 10 minutes from Cassidy's studio. I was early, which almost never happened, so I took the long way around through the shopping plaza to kill time. And there, parked in the lot directly across from Cassidy's yoga studio, in a spot facing the front entrance, was Grant's truck. His dark gray Ford F-150 with the construction company decal on the driver's side door and the dent in the rear bumper from when he backed into a dumpster at a job site in Garner. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. On a Wednesday, he was supposed to be at the Morrisville project site until 5. I slowed down. I didn't stop. I didn't pull in. I just slowed to about 15 miles an hour and looked at the truck and looked at the studio entrance with its exposed brick and its chalkboard sign and its succulents in the window. The breathe in peace, breathe out chaos sign was facing me like a personal insult. I drove to my showing. I sold the house. 3-bedroom ranch, original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, charming backyard. Listed at $329, offered at $315, closed 30 days later. I am very good at my job, even when my life is falling apart. Especially when my life is falling apart. Selling houses is the one place where the numbers always make sense. I didn't tell Cassidy about the truck. I didn't tell her about the lavender on Grant's skin, or the fill line on the body wash, or the fact that his Ford was parked directly across from her studio in the middle of a workday. For the first time since this whole thing started, I kept something from her. Not because I suspected her. I need to be clear about that. At that point, the thought that Cassidy was involved in anything other than being my best friend and most loyal ally hadn't even formed as a shadow in the back of my mind. She was the person helping me. She was the person I trusted. The idea that she was the problem was so far outside the realm of what I could imagine that it didn't even register as a possibility. I kept the lavender to myself because it felt like something that needed to be held close and examined alone. Like a stone I picked up in a riverbed that might be worth something or might be nothing, and I didn't want anyone telling me which one it was before I'd turned it over enough times to decide for myself. That same week, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone while Grant showered, in our shower this time, which I noted with the clinical detachment of a woman who'd started tracking her husband's hygiene patterns like they were market analytics. I opened the Zillow app on his phone, which he'd left on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping. I was curious. Grant had been talking about wanting to look at investment properties, and I'd assumed he was browsing listings the way men browse truck accessories, casually and with no intention of buying. There was a saved listing. A studio apartment at 412 Foster Street in Durham. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 720 square feet, listed at $14.50 a month. I looked at it for about 3 seconds, thought client research, maybe, closed the app, and set his phone back down. I didn't think about it again that night. I would think about it constantly later. But that night, I just lay in the dark and listened to the shower running and smelled the lavender that wasn't there yet and felt the first faint crack in something I couldn't name. Not suspicion exactly, more like the absence of certainty. The moment when the ground you've been standing on shifts just enough to make you check your footing. By September, the spreadsheet had grown into something that would have made a forensic accountant nod with grudging respect. 47 rows, color-coded. Cross-referenced with Grant's work calendar, which I'd started screenshotting every Sunday night while he watched football and didn't notice me standing behind the couch with his phone angled toward the kitchen light. $14,600, 7 separate transfers to the same credit union account over 5 months. Each one larger than the last, like whoever was spending the money was getting bolder or less careful, or both. I sat Grant down at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening in early September. I had my laptop open to the spreadsheet. I had the Chase app pulled up on my phone. I had 5 months of withdrawals printed out on paper. Actual paper, because I wanted him to look at the numbers in black ink on a white page where he couldn't swipe them away or close the tab or pretend the screen had glitched. I'd printed them at the Coldwell Banker office on my lunch break using the good printer in the conference room, the one that Diane kept threatening to put a password on because people were using it for personal documents, which I absolutely was. $14,600, I said. Since April. 7 separate transfers to an account at Southern Wake Federal Credit Union that I can't connect to anything. I want to know what it's for, and I want to know right now. Grant's face did something I hadn't seen before in 7 years of marriage. He didn't get angry. He didn't deflect. He didn't crack his knuckles or go loud or make the argument about my personality instead of his math. He looked scared. Genuinely, visibly scared. His jaw went tight and his eyes dropped to the printout like it was a medical diagnosis he'd been avoiding, the kind the doctor slides across the desk with both hands and then waits for you to read. He said he'd fix it. He'd talk to Doug, set up a repayment plan, monthly installments. He'd get it back, every cent. He said this quietly, almost small, like a man who'd been caught and knew it and was searching for the smallest possible version of the truth that would make the conversation end. He killed the kitchen project the next day, called the contractor and canceled. Told me it was never the right time anyway, that the market was soft and we should wait until spring, which was the first financially responsible thing he'd said in 5 months, and somehow the one that made me trust him the least. I should have felt like I'd won something. I should have felt relief or satisfaction, or at least the grim pleasure of being right, after months of being told I was paranoid and obsessive and suffocating. I felt nothing. A hollow, ringing nothing, like tapping your knuckle on a wall and realizing there's no stud behind it, just drywall and air and the understanding that what you thought was solid has been empty this whole time. I went to work that Friday and made it until about 1:15 in the afternoon before the nothing became something, and the something was a wave that I couldn't outrun. The storage room at Coldwell Banker was at the end of the hallway past the break room. It was the size of a generous closet, lined with metal shelves stacked with printer paper and file boxes, and a tower of empty binders that someone had been meaning to recycle since the previous administration. It smelled like toner and hand sanitizer and the faint ghost of someone's microwaved fish from 2 Tuesdays ago. It was not a dignified place to fall apart. But dignity was a luxury I'd run out of somewhere between the ceramic bowl and the 14th spreadsheet row. I locked the door and cried into a roll of paper towels. Not delicate, quiet, photogenic crying. The kind where your face swells up and your sinuses fill with concrete and you make a noise like a storm door being ripped off its hinges in a hurricane. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere below your stomach, somewhere you didn't know had a reservoir, and it empties out of you in heaves that make your ribs ache and your throat burn and your hands shake against the paper towel roll that you're holding like a lifeline because it is the only solid object within reach. Rosa found me. I don't know how. Maybe she heard me through the wall. Maybe she just knew, the way she always seemed to know when something in my orbit had shifted from bad to worse. She didn't knock. She tried the handle, found it locked, and said through the door, "Viv, it's me. Open up." Not a question, an instruction. Gentle, but with the kind of authority that comes from someone who has decided they are going to be present for you whether you want them to or not. I opened the door. She walked in, looked at me, looked at the paper towel situation, and without saying a word, turned over an empty filing box and sat down on it like she was settling in for a long appointment. She crossed her ankles, she folded her hands, and she waited. I told her I didn't even know if I wanted to save my marriage. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. The words came out hoarse and raw and tasting like salt, and they hung in the air of that storage room between the paper towel roll and the recycling binders and the ghost of someone's reheated tilapia. Rosa looked at me for a long time. Not the long time that feels like judgment. The long time that feels like someone is giving your words room to exist, letting them take up space and wait before she responds. She had this way of pausing that made you feel like what you'd said was worth the silence it created. Then she spoke. "Figure that out first," she said. "Before you figure out anything else, before the spreadsheet, before the money, before Grant, figure out what you want. Because everything that comes after depends on the answer." I wiped my face with a paper towel that had the texture of light-grade sandpaper and probably removed a layer of skin along with the mascara. I stood up. I blew my nose. I looked in the reflection of the metal shelf and saw a woman with swollen eyes and a red nose and paper towel lint stuck to her cheek who was supposed to have a 3 o'clock closing on a townhouse in Briar Creek. I went back to my desk. I closed the townhouse sale. I opened a new listing in Wakefield Plantation. I processed both without a single error, and I didn't think about Grant once during either transaction. That might have been the most productive afternoon of my entire quarter. That following Sunday, Cassidy had news. She came over in the morning with a foil-wrapped loaf of pumpkin bread because fall was coming, and Cassidy was the kind of person who transitioned her baked goods seasonally, like she was curating a menu at a farm-to-table restaurant. The pumpkin bread was dense and perfect, brown sugar crumble on top, cream cheese swirl through the middle, wrapped in aluminum foil with a sticky note that said, "New season, new strength." She set it on my kitchen counter next to the ceramic bowl that I'd glued back together, the one with the magnolia split down the middle and the seam that didn't quite line up, and told me what she'd heard. "Meredith is panicking," she said, pulling herself up onto the counter stool and crossing her legs like she was settling in for a debrief. I ran into her at the studio on Tuesday. She was venting to one of the other women after class. Didn't know I was still in the back room rolling mats. She said Grant cut them off, just like that. Said you got to him. She raised her eyebrows over her coffee cup. "See? You standing up for yourself worked. Meredith is scrambling." I wanted to believe her so badly. And you know what? For about 2 weeks, I did. I really did. The money had stopped moving. The spreadsheet hadn't needed a new row since the confrontation. Grant was quieter, but it was a different kind of quiet than the hostile silence of July. This quiet felt like contrition, or at least a reasonable imitation of it. The October Sunday supper was the quietest one I'd attended in 7 years. The table was set the same as always, Kathleen's good plates with the little blue flowers. The tablecloth, cream-colored, slightly more yellowed than it had been in May, draped over the crack that everyone knew about. The ceiling fan clicking on every third rotation because Grant still hadn't fixed it, and at this point, I'd accepted that he would fix it approximately never. But something was different. Meredith barely looked at me. She talked to Kathleen about a coworker's baby shower. She talked to Doug about the dental practice, which apparently had picked up 2 new patients that week, which Doug presented like he'd discovered a new continent. She did not comment on my cooking, my job, my personality, my marriage, my financial oversight, or my right to exist within the Palmer family bloodline. She passed me the rolls without making eye contact, which was the closest thing to a peace offering Meredith Palmer Hicks was physically capable of producing. Kathleen was warmer than usual. She touched my arm when I helped carry the sweet tea pitcher from the kitchen. She complimented a blouse I was wearing, a navy wrap top I'd bought at the Nordstrom rack in Briar Creek the previous weekend. "That color looks beautiful on you, Vivian," she said, and her hand lingered on my elbow for a moment longer than necessary. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary, maternal, nothing special thing. And it nearly broke me because I couldn't remember the last time someone in the Palmer family had said something kind to me without an ulterior motive. Grant put his hand on my back when we sat down. Right there, in front of everyone. His palm flat between my shoulder blades, warm and steady, like a man who was trying to tell you something without using words. Owen noticed. He glanced at Grant's hand, and then at me, and then back at his plate with the same expression he wore when reviewing game film, processing information without reacting to it. Cassidy was there, of course, because Cassidy was always there. First Sunday, same table, same tablecloth, same crack. She sat at the far end next to Owen and across from Doug, and she caught my eye halfway through the pot roast, which Kathleen had made again because apparently chicken was a one-time experiment, and gave me a little thumbs up, half hidden behind her sweet tea glass, subtle, like a coach signaling a play from the sideline. "See? We did it!" I almost relaxed. I was so close to relaxing that my shoulders actually dropped for the first time in months. I sat back in my chair. I ate a second piece of Kathleen's pound cake without counting a single calorie, or doing mental math about whether I could afford the emotional luxury of enjoying something at this table. The pound cake was good. It was genuinely, surprisingly good. Kathleen's pound cake was the one thing she made that didn't require a survival instinct to eat, and I savored it with the kind of attention I usually reserved for closing documents on a waterfront property. Owen said yes, ma'am, when Kathleen asked if he wanted more sweet tea. He held the door for Meredith when she went to the bathroom. He shook Grant's hand when they arrived and again when they left. He was the same as always. Solid, polite, quiet in a way that felt like stability rather than absence. I liked Owen. I always had. He was a good man who worked hard and didn't say much and loved his wife in the steady, unspectacular way that doesn't make for interesting stories but makes for a life. I liked Owen. And what was coming was going to destroy him. That night, after the drive home, after the quiet satisfaction of a Sunday supper that hadn't ended with me being insulted or dismissed or told to apologize, Grant went to the gym. He said he needed to clear his head. Long week, tight deadlines on the Morrisville project, just wanted an hour on the treadmill. Planet Fitness on Capitol Boulevard closed at 8 on Sundays. I knew this because I'd looked it up on my phone 3 weeks earlier while sitting in the Coldwell Banker parking lot, which is the kind of thing you do when you've stopped trusting your husband's schedule and started trusting Google instead. He walked through the front door at 10:52. I know the exact time because I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch a cooking show, and the microwave clock in the kitchen was visible from the couch if you leaned slightly to the left, which I was doing with the casual intensity of a woman who had turned time tracking into a full-body activity. He came to bed smelling like lavender, not the candle kind, the skin kind, the concentrated, essential oil, rubbed into the pulse points kind that I'd first noticed in late August and had been tracking with the clinical detachment of a scientist monitoring a recurring anomaly. I didn't say anything. I lay in the dark and listened to him fall asleep and thought about the fact that the gym closed at 8 and he walked in at 10:52, and the difference between those two numbers was 2 hours and 52 minutes of time. That didn't belong to Planet Fitness and didn't belong to me. I thought about how many lies can fit inside a quiet Sunday supper. I need to tell you what happened next, and I need you to understand something first. I am not a detective. I am not a woman in a movie who pours herself a glass of Pinot Grigio and starts pinning clues to a corkboard with red string while dramatic music plays. I am a realtor who spends her days reading closing documents and arguing with title companies and eating protein bars over the sink because she overslept again. What I did next wasn't genius. It wasn't a master plan. It was just the only thing left when everything else had stopped making sense. On a Tuesday morning in early October, I went out to Grant's truck to grab a pair of sunglasses I'd left in the door pocket. It was 6:35 in the morning. He was still in the shower. I could hear the water running through the bathroom window, which meant I had approximately 7 minutes before he emerged in a towel and started looking for his phone, which was currently sitting on the nightstand where he'd left it next to an empty glass of water and a Sports Illustrated he'd been reading the same article in for 3 weeks. I opened the passenger door. The sunglasses weren't in the door pocket. I checked the center console. Not there either. I opened the glove box, thinking they might have slid in during a turn, and my hand brushed something that wasn't sunglasses. A folded piece of paper, tucked behind the vehicle registration and the insurance card, positioned the way you position something you don't want found but also don't want to throw away. I almost didn't unfold it. My fingers were on the crease and my brain was saying, "Sunglasses, you're looking for sunglasses. Put it back and find the sunglasses." But my hands had already decided, the way hands do when they know something the rest of you hasn't caught up to yet. It was a lease agreement. I read it standing in the driveway in my pajama pants and bare feet, with the October morning air cool enough that I could see my breath, which seemed appropriate because my breathing had become the kind of deliberate, mechanical process that happens when your body decides that automatic functions need to be handled manually for the next few minutes. 412 Foster Street, Durham, North Carolina. Unit B. Studio apartment. 720 square feet. Monthly rent. $1,450. Lease commencement date, June 1st. June. The same month the money started disappearing. Tenant, Grant Palmer. Cosigner, C. Lane. I stared at those 2 letters and that last name for so long that the paper started to tremble, which is when I realized it wasn't the paper. It was my hands. C. Lane. The initial and the surname sitting there on a standard North Carolina residential lease agreement like they were nothing, like they were just 2 words on a line in a document, like they didn't contain the answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking. C. Lane. Cassidy Lane. I put the lease back exactly where I'd found it. I aligned it behind the registration, matched the fold, closed the glove box, closed the truck door. I walked inside. I put on shoes. I picked up my purse and my keys and got into my Lexus and backed out of the driveway with the kind of controlled, mechanical precision that comes from somewhere outside your conscious mind, the part of you that knows how to drive and breathe and swallow when the rest of you has gone somewhere very far away and very quiet. I drove to the Harris Teeter on Falls of Noose Road, not because I needed groceries, because it was the first parking lot that appeared, and I needed to stop the car before I forgot how. I pulled into a space near the back, away from the entrance, next to a cart corral and a minivan with a My Kid Made Honor Roll bumper sticker. I put the Lexus in park. I put my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and I sat there. 45 minutes. The Harris Teeter opened at 6. People were walking in with their reusable bags and their travel mugs and their Tuesday morning faces, the ones that say, "I need coffee and I have a meeting at 9 and my kid forgot his lunchbox again." Regular lives. Ordinary Tuesdays. And I was sitting in the back of the parking lot with my engine running and my hands on the wheel trying to do math that I didn't want the answer to. $1,450 a month since June. 5 months. That was $7,250 in rent alone. Add the $14,600 from savings. That was $21,850. Nearly our entire savings. Gone. Not to Doug. Not to the dental practice. Not to Meredith's family or payroll gaps or bridge loans or any of the stories I'd been told and retold and confirmed and cross-referenced in a spreadsheet that suddenly looked less like evidence and more like a map that had been drawn to lead me in circles. The money had never gone to Doug. A woman knocked on my window, not hard, just a tap. She was maybe 60, white hair, Harris Teeter apron, probably on her way in for an early shift. She asked if I was okay. I must have looked like something that needed asking about, sitting in a parked car at 6:45 in the morning, staring straight ahead with both hands on the wheel, like I was driving through a storm that only I could see. I smiled. I said I was fine. I said I was just making a phone call. She nodded and walked away, and I watched her go through the automatic doors and disappear into the fluorescent light of the produce section, and I thought, I should buy bananas, which is the kind of absurd, irrelevant thought your brain produces when it's trying to protect you from the thing you're not ready to process. I didn't buy bananas. I drove to Coldwell Banker. I sat at my desk. I opened the MLS portal. I entered 3 listing agreements and responded to 2 client emails and confirmed a showing for Thursday at a 4-bedroom colonial in Heritage that had been sitting on the market for 67 days because the owners wanted $425 and the comp said $390 at best. I didn't call Cassidy. I didn't call anyone. I ate half a turkey sandwich at my desk and drank a coffee that Rosa left there without comment. And I thought about the initial C. The next day at lunch, I sat in my Lexus in the Coldwell Banker parking lot with the engine running and the doors locked and did the thing that I'd been circling around since 6:35 the previous morning. The family iPad. We had one. A 3rd-generation model we'd bought during a Black Friday sale 3 years ago that lived on the kitchen counter and was used primarily for recipes Vivian never made, a Candy Crush addiction Grant thought I didn't know about, and occasionally pulling up Netflix when the remote disappeared into the couch cushions. What Grant had apparently forgotten, or never understood, or simply didn't think mattered, was that his Google account was logged in on that iPad. And Google, God bless its invasive, data-hoarding, privacy-annihilating soul, tracks everything. I'd taken the iPad that morning, slid it into my work bag while Grant was pouring coffee and scrolling his phone at the kitchen island. He didn't notice. He never noticed what I carried out of the house. He barely noticed what I carried in. I opened Google Timeline. The interface loaded slowly because the iPad was old and the Coldwell Banker parking lot had mediocre cell reception, which meant I had about 45 seconds of watching a loading circle spin while my heartbeat did something uncomfortable in my throat. Then the map appeared, and the dots appeared, and the world I'd been living in for the past 5 months quietly rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. 14 dots, 14 visits, all at the same address, 412 Foster Street, Durham, North Carolina. I scrolled through the dates one by one, my finger moving across the screen with the methodical steadiness of a woman who had spent a decade reading closing documents and knew that the details mattered more than the headlines. July 14th, July 21st, August 2nd, August 9th, August 16th, September 5th, September 8th, September 12th through 14th, which was a full weekend, September 19th, September 26th, October 1st, October 3rd, October 7th, 14 visits in 3 months, some for a few hours, some overnight. The September 12th through 14th entry showed arrival at 7:22 in the evening on Friday and departure at 11:15 on Sunday morning. A full weekend at a studio apartment in Durham that my husband had leased in June with a co-signer whose initial was C. I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar. My hands were steady. My brain was operating in a mode I can only describe as professional, the same mode I used when reviewing a home inspection report that revealed termite damage the sellers had painted over. You don't panic. You read. You note. You build a case. July 14th. I'd had an evening open house at a listing in North Raleigh. Got home at 9:30. Grant said he'd been at a project site doing overtime. August 2nd. I'd driven to Durham to visit my mother. Left Saturday morning, came back Sunday evening. Grant said he was staying home to catch up on project reports. September 12th through 14th. The full weekend. I'd been at my mother's apartment in Durham because Grant and I had fought about the money again, and I needed 2 days away from the sound of his voice. Every single visit to 412 Foster Street happened on a night I wasn't home. I closed Google Timeline and opened the Eufy app. Not my Eufy camera, the Petersons. Jim and Linda Peterson, 2 houses down on our cul-de-sac. I'd sold them their house 2 years ago. A 4-bedroom Cape Cod with original hardwood and a screened-in porch that Linda had fallen in love with during the first showing. We'd stayed friendly enough that when their Eufy security camera caught a package theft on their porch last spring, I'd helped them file the report, and they'd given me guest access to the camera feed as a thank you, since it covered a wide angle of the street, including part of my driveway. I hadn't thought about that guest access in months. Now I thought about nothing else. I scrolled to August 2nd, the night I'd been at my mother's. At 1:34 in the morning, a white Toyota RAV4 pulled into my driveway, headlights off. The camera caught the hood, the windshield, and the Namaste bumper sticker on the rear that was visible when the car turned to park. Cassidy's car, in my driveway, at 1:34 in the morning. The next motion event was at 4:51 in the morning, the RAV4 backing out, headlights still off. 3 hours and 17 minutes in my house while I was 45 minutes away, and Durham and Grant's truck sat in the driveway like a monument to everything I'd been too trusting to see. I checked August 16th, another night I'd been at my mother's. Cassidy's RAV4, 1:52 in the morning, departed 4:38, 2 hours and 46 minutes. September 8th, 2:08 in the morning, departed 5:22, 3 hours and 14 minutes. 3 visits, all after midnight, all on nights I wasn't home. All while my husband's dark gray F-150 sat in the driveway with its construction company decal facing the street like a billboard advertising his availability. My hands went cold, not metaphorically, literally cold, like the blood had pulled back from my fingers and relocated to somewhere deeper in my chest where it could be more useful, or at least less visible. I opened Instagram, found Cassidy's profile, scrolled to September. On September 12th and 13th, the days of the full Durham weekend, nothing posted. Radio silence. On September 14th, a Sunday, a selfie with the caption, Self-Care Sunday. Freshly done hair, new earrings, little gold hoops I'd never seen before. She was glowing, not filter glowing. Genuinely, unmistakably, someone just had the weekend of her life, glowing. I closed Instagram and opened my text thread with Cassidy. Scrolled to September 12th. She'd texted me at 8:47 that morning. Retreat weekend with my yoga certification group in Asheville. Spotty Wi-Fi, so I might be quiet for a couple days. Love you, Viv. Asheville. 3 hours west of Raleigh. 45 minutes from Durham. The same stretch of Carolina mountains. The same direction on Interstate 40. She wasn't in Asheville. She was in Durham. At 412 Foster Street, in a studio apartment that my husband leased with her name on the dotted line, for a full weekend. While I was 40 minutes away at my mother's kitchen table eating arroz con pollo and wondering why my marriage felt like a house with no foundation, I set the iPad face down on my lap and stared straight ahead at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into her minivan. A landscaping truck idled at the red light on the corner. A bird landed on the dumpster behind the building and sat there looking at nothing, which made two of us. My brain tried to explain it. That's what brains do. They protect you from the thing you're not ready to know by offering you alternatives that are less catastrophic. Maybe she was checking on the house. Maybe she stopped by to drop something off. Maybe there's an explanation that doesn't involve the two people I trusted most in the world conspiring to dismantle my life while I tracked the wrong numbers in a spreadsheet designed to keep me blind. One paragraph of that's all my brain could manage before the math crushed it. When you find out that the person you've been crying to about your husband is the person sleeping with your husband, your brain doesn't go to anger first. It doesn't go to rage or revenge or any of the things you see in movies where a woman flips a table and throws a suitcase out a second-story window. It goes somewhere else entirely, somewhere very quiet, very cold. Like someone reached inside your chest and turned the thermostat down to 0, and suddenly you're standing in the middle of your own life and everything looks the same, but nothing is. I drove home that evening on autopilot, pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, sat for a moment looking at the front of my house. The porch light was on. Grant's truck was in the garage. Cassidy's house was 2 doors down, her white RAV4 parked in her driveway with the Namaste bumper sticker catching the last of the October light, a house I'd walked to 100 times. A door I'd knocked on with a bottle of wine and a bad day and the assumption that the woman on the other side was my friend. I went inside and the house felt different. Not the temperature, not the light, the meaning of everything in it. I walked past the kitchen counter where a lavender candle sat half-burned in its ceramic jar, the calm one, the first one she'd ever given me. I'd been burning it that week because the smell made me feel safe. Now I looked at it and saw a surveillance device disguised as a gift. Every candle she'd brought, every foil-wrapped loaf, every sticky note that said, "You've got this," Mama, was a check-in, a temperature reading. A way to walk through my front door and assess the situation and report back to the man she was sleeping with about what his wife knew and didn't know. I walked past the living room, the couch where we'd sat with Pinot Grigio and a laptop on a Friday night, while she pointed at my bank statements with her pink fingernail and built a spreadsheet designed to lead me in circles. She'd seen every number, every transfer, every detail of my financial life spread out on a screen between 2 glasses of wine and a burning candle. And she'd taken that information and fed it to Meredith, not because Meredith asked for it, because an armed Meredith was a louder Meredith. The more ammunition Meredith had, the harder she'd come at me at Sunday suppers, and the more everyone, including me, would stay focused on the obvious villain instead of the one pouring the wine. Cassidy was feeding the decoy, and it had worked perfectly for 5 months. I stood in the hallway and started replaying. Not because I wanted to, because my brain had switched into the same mode it used when I found termite damage behind fresh paint, systematic, methodical, pulling up every interaction and examining it under new light. The yoga class report. Cassidy said Meredith bragged about Grant being generous. Unlike some people, I'd written that quote in my spreadsheet. Column D, source, Cassidy Lane. July 28th. Yoga class conversation. But that conversation probably never happened. Cassidy needed me to believe that Meredith was confirming the money went to Doug, so I'd never look anywhere else. The Waterfall Island. Cassidy, standing in my kitchen doorway, wine glass in hand, looking at the space with the eye of someone who was already decorating. Your kitchen would be stunning with a waterfall island. She'd planted the seed in Grant's head. She'd texted him a contractor's name. She was designing a kitchen she planned to use, in a house she planned to occupy, not as a guest, not as a neighbor, as something else entirely. Why can't you just be more like Cassidy? That's what Grant said to me in the car back in May. In May, they were already together by then. He said the name of the woman he was sleeping with to his wife's face and used it as a comparison. I don't know if Cassidy coached him into that, but the fact that I'll never know is almost worse than knowing. The vulnerability. The tearful moment on the porch after a Sunday supper when Cassidy told me she and Owen were barely talking, that he came home from coaching and just sat in the garage with his headphones on, that they felt like roommates. Her eyes had gone red. Not crying, just that almost crying that's somehow worse. And I'd hugged her. I'd said, "We'll get through this, both of us." And I'd meant it completely. But that wasn't trust between two friends going through hard times. That was an insurance policy. If Vivian suspects me, she'll remember that I was hurting too, that I was honest about my problems, that I wouldn't do this because I was going through the same thing. Except Cassidy wasn't going through the same thing. Cassidy was the thing I was going through. The bank screenshots. She'd seen them all on wine night, and she'd forwarded them to Meredith. You don't receive someone's private bank statements on your phone and just shrug. You know who sent them? You know why? Meredith didn't care about the why, because those numbers gave her exactly what she wanted. Proof, in her mind, that she was right about me all along, that I was obsessive, that I was controlling. That I was the problem. And the lease. The referral line on the lease agreement at 412 Foster Street listed a name. My name, Vivian Torres. Cassidy had put me down as the referring party. Which meant if this ever went sideways, if the landlord ever looked into it, if anyone ever asked, there was a paper trail suggesting that I knew about the apartment, that I'd helped arrange it. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built a trap door underneath me and labeled it with my own signature. I stood in my kitchen at midnight and scrubbed the granite counter until it squeaked. I used the rough side of the sponge and a spray bottle of method cleaner, and I went back and forth across the surface like I was trying to remove something that existed below the stone. The lavender candle was still burning on the counter beside me. I blew it out, picked it up, held it for a moment in my hand, the ceramic still warm, the wax still liquid around the wick. Then I set it in the trash can under the sink and closed the cabinet door. Every piece of information Cassidy had given me was designed to keep me looking at the wrong person. Meredith was loud and territorial and easy to hate, and Cassidy knew that. She knew I'd spend my energy fighting the obvious enemy while the real one sat next to me on the couch, pouring my wine and learning exactly what I knew and exactly what I didn't. And the worst part? The part that made me scrub that counter until my wrist ached and the granite gleamed like a showroom display was that it had worked. For 5 months. Perfectly. I had thanked her for every candle. I had hugged her on my porch. I had called her my best friend and my closest ally and my person. And she had smiled and squeezed my hand and said, "You've got this, Viv," while she systematically dismantled everything I had. I stopped scrubbing. I rinsed the sponge. I dried my hands on the towel hanging from the oven handle. And I looked at the kitchen that Grant had wanted to renovate with a waterfall island that Cassidy had designed, and I thought about 11 days. The next Sunday supper was 11 days away, everyone at one table. And I didn't need a complicated plan. I needed one question asked in front of the right people at the right time. Rosa Gutierrez was the kind of woman who noticed things other people tried to hide. She noticed when the copier paper was running low before anyone else filed a complaint. She noticed when Diane's mood shifted from mildly irritated to dangerously silent, which usually meant someone had botched a listing agreement. And she noticed, on that Tuesday morning in early October, that I had not touched my coffee. "You didn't drink it," she said, pulling her chair around to my side of the desk. Not across from me, next to me. That mattered. "I'm not thirsty." "You're always thirsty. You drink 3 cups before 11. It's 10:47, and that cup is full and cold." She tapped the rim of my mug with one finger. "Talk to me." I had not told anyone. Not my mother in Durham, who would have driven up in her Camry with a suitcase and a rosary and a plan to dismantle Grant Palmer limb by limb. Not my college roommate Tasha in Charlotte, who would have posted something vaguely threatening on Instagram within the hour. I had carried the weight of Cassidy Lane, 412 Foster Street, 14 Google timeline dots, 3 midnight RAV, 4 visits, and 1 co-signed lease agreement entirely inside my own chest for 6 days. 6 days of smiling at Grant across the dinner table. 6 days of responding to Cassidy's texts with single emojis. 6 days of selling houses and filing paperwork and pretending that the ground beneath me had not already cracked wide open. But Rosa was sitting next to me, not across from me, and sometimes that is the only thing that makes the difference. I told her everything. Not in order. Not neatly. I started with the lavender candle and jumped to the lease and circled back to the wine night and then forward to the Google timeline and then sideways to the Eufy camera footage and then back again to May, to the pot roast, to Meredith's voice cutting across the table, to Grant's silence, to Cassidy's hand squeezing mine under the tablecloth. Rosa did not interrupt. She did not gasp or cover her mouth or say, "Oh my God," the way people do in movies when they hear something devastating. She just listened. Her hands were folded on her lap. Her eyes stayed on mine. When I finished, the office was quiet. Diane had left for a showing. The printer hummed in the back room. My coffee was still cold. Rosa spoke after a full 30 seconds of silence. I counted. "You need to protect yourself," she said. "Not emotionally. Legally. I know. Do you have copies?" "Everything's on Google Drive." "That's not enough." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small plastic package. A flash drive, 32 gigabytes, silver with a blue cap. The price sticker from Staples was still on the back, $11.99. She placed it on my desk the way a surgeon places an instrument on a tray. Deliberately. Without hesitation. "Download everything onto this. The spreadsheet, the screenshots, the Google timeline, the camera footage, the lease photo, every text Cassidy ever sent you, every transaction, every date. Put it all on here, and put this somewhere that is not your house, not your car, and not your phone." I picked up the flash drive. It weighed almost nothing. That seemed impossible given what it was about to hold. That evening, after Grant left for what he called a quick run to Lowe's at 7:15, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The cracked ceramic bowl was still on the counter. The superglue seam caught the overhead light. I opened Google Drive and began downloading. The spreadsheet came first. 47 rows, color-coded, every withdrawal from June through September, every explanation Grant had offered, every verification source. Green for confirmed. Yellow for suspicious. Red for confirmed false. By October, the sheet was almost entirely red. Then, the screenshots. Cassidy's texts, arranged chronologically. The early ones were warm. "Thinking of you, V. You deserve so much better. I'm always here." The later ones were strategic. Meredith mentioned the money again at yoga. Doug seemed nervous when I brought up the loan. Grant told Owen he's been stressed, maybe give him space. Each message had felt like support when I received it. Now, lined up on the screen, they read like a playbook, move by move, candle by candle. Wine glass by wine glass. The Google timeline export came next. 14 dots on a map, all pointing to the same 720-square-foot studio in Durham that my husband leased with my best friend's signature. The Eufy camera clips followed. 3 videos. 3 arrivals between 1:30 and 2:15 in the morning. 3 departures before 5. Cassidy's white RAV4 pulling into my driveway while I slept at my mother's apartment 22 miles away, believing I was the one running from my problems. The lease photograph was last. I had taken it with my phone in Grant's truck, hand steady, breath held, the document centered perfectly in the frame. Tenant, Grant Palmer. Co-signer, C. Lane. Monthly rent, $1,450. Lease start, June 1st. The same month Cassidy brought me Pinot Grigio and told me I was strong. I dragged everything onto the flash drive. The transfer took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it finished, I ejected the drive, capped it with the blue plastic top, and held it in my palm. $11.99 worth of truth. $21,850 worth of betrayal. I drove to Rosa's apartment in North Hills. She answered the door in sweatpants and a Wolfpack hoodie, holding a bowl of cereal. I handed her the flash drive without a word. She took it, nodded once, and said, "I'll put it in my fireproof safe." Behind the tax returns. On the drive home, I passed the Cassidy's studio. The lights were off. A small sign in the window read Sunrise Flow, Saturdays 7 a.m. I kept driving. When I got home, Grant was on the couch watching ESPN. He looked up and smiled. "Lowe's was packed," he said. "Didn't find what I needed." I smiled back. "That's okay," I said. "Sometimes you don't." I walked to the bedroom, plugged in my phone, and opened my calendar. October 19th was 11 days away, Kathleen's next Sunday supper. I circled the date in my mind, not on paper, not on a screen. Just inside, where no one else could see it. One question, one table, one sentence that would collapse everything Cassidy Lane had spent 5 months building. 11 days. 11 days is not a long time. It is not enough time to repaint a bedroom or close on a house or forgive someone who has been sleeping with your husband in a 720-square-foot studio apartment that your savings account paid for liver. But 11 days is exactly enough time to become someone your enemy does not recognize. Day 11, October 8th, a Wednesday. I woke up at 5:45, made coffee in the French press. Grant bought me for my 32nd birthday and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the MLS portal. I had 3 showings scheduled, a listing appointment at noon, and a comparative market analysis due to Diane by 4. I completed every task ahead of schedule. I smiled at the receptionist. I complimented Rosa's new earrings. I ate a turkey wrap at my desk and drank 2 cups of coffee and answered every email within 30 minutes of receiving it. I was, by every external measure, the most functional version of myself. Cassidy texted at 1:17 in the afternoon. "Hey V, pumpkin spice season. Want to grab lattes tomorrow after your showing?" I replied with a thumbs up emoji. Nothing more. She sent back a heart. I stared at the heart for 11 seconds, then locked my phone and returned to the CMA. Day 8. October 11th, a Saturday. Grant left for what he called a team breakfast at 9:30. He was wearing cologne. Not the Acqua di Gio he kept on the bathroom counter, the one I had bought him 3 Christmases ago. Something else. Something with a base note that smelled like cedar and a middle note that smelled like someone else's bedroom. I noticed. I said nothing. I watered the hydrangeas in the front yard and waved at the Petersons across the street. Linda Peterson waved back and shouted something about her Eufy camera catching a raccoon on the porch. I smiled and nodded and thought about what else that camera had caught. That afternoon, Cassidy stopped by unannounced. She was carrying a small brown bag from a boutique on Glenwood South. Inside was a scented candle. The label read, "Rise." Ivory wax, wooden wick, lavender, and sandalwood. "I saw this and thought of you," she said, placing it on my kitchen counter next to the cracked ceramic bowl. "You've been through so much, V. You deserve something beautiful." I looked at the candle. I looked at the bowl. I looked at the woman standing in my kitchen who had co-signed a lease with my husband 4 months ago and had spent every week since then sitting across from me, pouring my wine, lighting my candles, and building a version of reality where I was the fragile one and she was the foundation. "Thank you," I said. "It's perfect." She hugged me. I let her. Her hair smelled like eucalyptus and peppermint, the same scent I had found on Grant's skin in late August, the same scent that did not come from his Dove Men Plus Care body wash. I held the hug for exactly 3 seconds, then stepped back and smiled. She had no idea I was counting. Day 5. October 14th, a Tuesday. Cassidy's regular yoga class ran from 6 to 7:15 in the evening. Meredith attended every Tuesday. I knew this because Cassidy had told me week after week, reporting back on every comment Meredith made, every side-eye, every whispered aside. I had believed those reports were intelligence gathered on my behalf. I now understood they were scripts, carefully constructed to keep my anger aimed at Meredith and away from the woman who actually deserved it. That evening, I sat in my car outside the Coldwell Banker office, engine off, windows down. The October air was cool, 53 degrees. I opened my phone and reread the text thread with Cassidy from the beginning, May through October. 5 months of messages. I scrolled slowly, reading each one the way a detective reads a suspect's statement after the confession, looking for the lies hidden inside the truth. They were everywhere. Meredith is the problem. Doug is bleeding you dry. Grant just needs space. You're so strong, V. Every message pointed away from Cassidy. Every message built a wall between me and the actual betrayal. She had not just been my husband's lover. She had been my narrator. She had controlled the story I was living inside, and I had let her, because the candles smelled like comfort and the wine tasted like friendship, and the spreadsheet she helped me build was the most organized lie I had ever seen. I closed the phone. The office parking lot was empty except for my Lexus and a maintenance truck near the dumpster. A streetlight buzzed overhead. I took 3 deep breaths, not yoga breaths, not the kind Cassidy taught in her Saturday sunrise class. Just regular breaths, the kind you take when you are about to do something that cannot be undone. Day 3, October 16th, a Thursday. Grant came home with flowers, grocery store roses, the kind wrapped in cellophane with a barcode sticker still attached. He placed them on the counter without cutting the stems and said, "Just because." "Just because what?" I asked. "Just because I love you." I put the roses in a vase, trimmed the stems at a 45-degree angle the way my mother taught me, and added a tablespoon of sugar to the water. I thanked him. I kissed his cheek. He tasted like spearmint gum and guilt. That night, he fell asleep at 10:22. I lay awake until midnight, staring at the ceiling fan, making its slow rotations. 3 days, 72 hours. Kathleen had already texted the family group chat, confirming Sunday supper. Roast chicken, not pot roast. Green beans from the farmer's market, peach cobbler. Meredith had replied with, "Can't wait," followed by 3 exclamation points. Doug had sent a thumbs up. Owen had written, "Yes, ma'am." Cassidy had added a heart emoji and the words, "I'll bring the wine." Of course she would bring the wine. She always brought the wine. She brought the wine and the candles and the comfort and the betrayal, all wrapped in the same warm packaging, delivered with the same steady hands, poured with the same careful smile. And in 72 hours, I was going to sit at Kathleen Palmer's dining table, surrounded by every person who had lied to me, enabled the lying, or profited from my ignorance, and I was going to ask one question. Not to Grant. Not to Cassidy, to Meredith, because Meredith was the decoy. Meredith was the loud, obvious villain Cassidy had constructed to absorb my attention. And the fastest way to collapse a decoy is to prove you know it is one. One question. 3 days. I closed my eyes and counted the rotations of the ceiling fan until I lost track somewhere past 200. October 19th fell on a Sunday. The sky over Raleigh was the kind of gray that could not decide whether it wanted to rain or simply hang there, heavy and uncertain, like a conversation no one wanted to start. I drove to Kathleen Palmer's house at 4:37 in the afternoon. I checked the dashboard clock twice before pulling out of the driveway, the way a person checks the safety on a weapon before walking into a room where she intends to use it. I wore a navy blouse, dark jeans, and the small gold hoops my mother gave me for my 30th birthday. No perfume, no lavender. I wanted to smell like nothing. Grant drove separately. He said he needed to stop at Lowe's on the way. I did not ask which Lowe's. I had stopped asking Grant Palmer questions I already knew the answers to. The only question I had left was not for him. Kathleen's driveway held 4 vehicles: Doug's gray Tahoe, Meredith's white Camry, Owen's black Silverado, and Cassidy's white RAV4 parked closest to the front walk as if she belonged here more than anyone. I sat in the Lexus for 90 seconds, hands at 10 and 2, breathing. Not yoga breaths. Just air in, air out, the way your body does it when your mind has already gone somewhere quiet and sharp and irreversible. The house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary. Kathleen smiled when she saw me. I carried the peach cobbler to the dining table, straightened the napkins, adjusted the silverware, and did all of the small, ordinary things a daughter-in-law does when she is about to detonate every relationship in the room. The table seated 8, Kathleen at the head, Grant to her right, then me. Across, Meredith, then Doug. Owen at the far end, hands folded like a man waiting for church. Cassidy sat next to Owen, directly across from me, close enough that I could see the small gold pendant she told me she bought herself last spring as a self-love gift. She smiled at me, the same warm smile she wore when she brought me Pinot Grigio and showed me how to color-code my heartbreak. The same smile she carried into my house at 1:30 in the morning on 3 separate occasions while I slept 22 miles away. Kathleen said, "Grace." I kept my eyes open. So did Cassidy. Our eyes met for 2 seconds. She winked. I did not wink back. Dinner moved the way Palmer family dinners always moved. Doug complimented the chicken. Meredith mentioned a co-worker's wedding in Savannah. Owen said yes, ma'am, and ate 2 plates without speaking more than 9 words. Grant's knee touched mine under the table, performing closeness like an actor who no longer remembers what the emotion was supposed to feel like. Cassidy poured the Sauvignon Blanc she had brought in a cloth bag tagged for the family. When she poured mine, she leaned in and whispered, "You okay tonight? You seem quiet." "I'm perfect," I said. I waited until the plates were half empty, until Doug had told his second patient story, until Meredith had checked her phone twice and Owen had used the bathroom and returned. Until the room settled into that mid-dinner hum where everyone's guard drops because the food is warm and the wine is working and nobody expects anything to happen between the chicken and the cobbler. Then I put my fork down. "Meredith," I said, calm, not cold. The tone of a woman asking a neighbor about a borrowed garden tool. "I have a question." A green bean was still on her fork. "What?" "Last month, you said at this table that I was obsessive about money. You also received screenshots of my personal bank statements, Chase account, and Southern Wake Federal Credit Union. Transactions highlighted in yellow. Sent to your phone in late August or early September. I paused. Not for drama, for accuracy. Who sent you those screenshots, Meredith? The table went silent. Not comfortable silence. The airless silence of a room where someone has just pulled a pin. Meredith put her fork down. The green bean rolled onto the tablecloth. She looked at Doug. Doug stared at his plate. She looked at Grant. Grant's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the table edge. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice was higher, thinner. Yes, you do. You quoted numbers from that spreadsheet at the 4th of July party. Numbers you had no way of knowing unless someone shared my private financial documents with you. Tell me who. Meredith's eyes moved. Not to Doug, not to Grant. They moved, involuntarily and unmistakably, to Cassidy. It lasted less than a second. A flicker. A reflex. But I saw it, and Cassidy saw that I saw it. And in that fraction of a second, the architecture of 5 months of lavender candles, poured wine, whispered comfort, and strategic misdirection collapsed like a house built on a lease agreement signed with someone else's initials. Cassidy held her smile for 3 full seconds. Then it faded, not into anger, not into guilt, into recognition. The recognition of a woman who has just realized the person she spent 5 months underestimating had been counting every candle, every text, every midnight visit, every lie, and had chosen this exact moment to end it all. Owen looked at Cassidy, then at Grant, then at me. He set his napkin on the table, pushed his chair back, and stood. He did not yell. He did not ask for an explanation. He walked to the front door, opened it, stepped onto the porch with the flickering light, and closed the door behind him. His Silverado started 30 seconds later. The headlights swept across the front window as he backed out. Nobody moved. The peach cobbler sat untouched. The white taper candle Kathleen had lit flickered once in the draft. I picked up my glass of Sauvignon Blanc, the wine Cassidy had poured for the family, and took one long, slow sip. Then I set it down, looked at my husband, and said nothing. The question had not been for Grant, it had been for Meredith. And Meredith's eyes had answered it louder than any confession ever could. I stood up slowly. Not dramatically. Not the way women stand in movies when they have just delivered the final blow and the orchestra swells and the camera pulls back to reveal the wreckage. I stood the way a person stands when dinner is over and it is time to go home. I pushed my chair in. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I looked at Kathleen, who was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, her floral apron still tied, her eyes wide and wet, and I said, "Thank you for dinner, Kathleen. The chicken was wonderful." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I did not wait for it to. I walked past Meredith, who had not moved since her eyes betrayed her, past Doug, who was studying the grain of the wooden table as if it contained instructions for what to do next, past Grant, who reached for my hand as I passed and caught only air because I had already shifted my weight to the other side, a movement so small he might not have even noticed, but I did, and that was enough. Cassidy was the last person I passed. She was still seated. Her hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, the way a person braces when the ground shakes. The gold pendant caught the light from Kathleen's white taper candle. Her lips were parted slightly, as if she had prepared a sentence, but the words had dissolved somewhere between her throat and the room. I did not stop. I did not look at her directly. I let my shoulder pass within 6 inches of hers, close enough for her to smell the absence of lavender on my skin, and I kept walking. The front door was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was lighter. I stepped onto the porch. The bulb flickered its same broken rhythm, every 3rd second, the way it had since last Thanksgiving, the way it would probably continue until someone in that family decided to fix something instead of ignoring it. Owen's parking spot was empty, a dark oil stain on the concrete where his Silverado had been. The October air hit my face, 50 degrees, maybe 48. I did not check. I just felt it. My Lexus RX was parked at the curb. The 14-month-old scratch on the rear bumper caught the streetlight. I had gotten that scratch backing out of a showing in North Raleigh, the week before I discovered the first missing $5,200, back when the biggest problem in my life was a scuffed bumper and a mother-in-law who overcooked pot roast. That felt like someone else's life now. Someone who believed in lavender candles and wine nights, and women who whispered "let it go" while holding your hand and your husband at the same time. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 7:41. Dinner had lasted exactly 2 hours and 4 minutes. 5 months of investigation, 11 days of counting, one question, and it had taken Meredith's eyes less than a second to answer it. I pulled away from the curb without looking back, not because I was brave, because there was nothing behind me that I needed to see again. The rearview mirror showed Kathleen's porch light still flickering, growing smaller, and then the road curved and it was gone. I drove south on Capitol Boulevard. Past the Target where Cassidy and I had once spent 2 hours shopping for throw pillows she said would brighten my living room. Past the Starbucks where she ordered oat milk lattes and told me Grant just needed patience. Past the intersection where I had once pulled over to cry after the second withdrawal, the 2600 in late June, when I still thought Doug Hicks was the problem and Cassidy Lane was the solution. The road opened as I crossed the Wake County line. Fewer stoplights, fewer strip malls. The trees thickened on both sides, dark and tall, their October leaves half gone, branches reaching across the road like arms that could not quite touch. I rolled the window down 2 inches. The air smelled like pine and cold dirt and distance. Falls Lake appeared on my right. The water was black and still, reflecting nothing because the clouds had swallowed the moon. The bridge stretched ahead, a 1/4 mile of concrete and guardrails and yellow center lines, and I drove across it at exactly the speed limit, 45 miles per hour, both hands on the wheel, headlights cutting a clean tunnel through the dark. On the other side of the bridge, I pulled into the overlook. A gravel lot, no other cars. A wooden sign that read Falls Lake Wake County Parks and Recreation, with a phone number no one would ever call at 7:53 on a Sunday night in October. I turned off the engine. The headlights died. The dark came in from every direction. I sat there with my hands still on the wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing. The lake, the trees, the sky that still could not decide whether it wanted to rain. I thought about the flash drive in Rosa's fireproof safe, tucked behind her tax returns. 32 gigabytes, $11.99. I thought about the spreadsheet with its 47 red rows. I thought about the 14 dots on Grant's Google timeline. I thought about 3 midnight arrivals captured by a camera that belonged to neighbors who thought they were recording raccoons. I thought about a lease signed June 1st by a man who promised me forever and a woman who brought me candles while she burned my life to the ground. And then I thought about the peach cobbler sitting untouched on Kathleen Palmer's dining table, still warm, still waiting, while every chair around it sat empty or might as well have been. I did not cry. I had done my crying in a supply closet at Coldwell Banker, surrounded by filing boxes and the smell of toner. That was enough. Tonight was not for crying. Tonight was for the quiet that comes after the noise stops, when the ringing fades and you realize you can hear yourself think for the first time in 5 months. I started the engine again. The dashboard glowed soft blue. The clock read 8:04. The road ahead stretched past Falls Lake, past Durham, past every place I had been and every version of myself I had believed in, and it kept going. That was the thing about roads. They did not care where you had been. They only cared that you were still moving. I put the car in drive, pulled out of the gravel lot, and pointed the Lexus south. The headlights found the yellow center line and followed it. The window was still down 2 inches. The pine air came through clean and cold and new. The road stretched out ahead, dark and wide and mine. Here is the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It does not always arrive wearing a mask. Sometimes it arrives with a lavender candle and a bottle of Pinot Grigio. Sometimes it sits next to you and holds your hand and tells you that you are strong while quietly dismantling everything you built. The most dangerous person in your life is not the one who yells at you across a dinner table. It is the one who whispers comfort while stealing your peace. Trust your numbers. Trust your patterns. Trust the details that do not add up, even when the people around you insist that you are overthinking. You are not overthinking. You are paying attention. And sometimes paying attention is the loneliest thing a person can do, but it is also the thing that saves you. Not every friend who pours your wine is on your side, but every truth you uncover is. If you are sitting somewhere right now, listening to this story, and something in your chest tightened when Vivian found that lease agreement, or when Meredith's eyes moved without permission, Or when Owen walked out without a word, maybe it is because you have felt that silence before. The silence of knowing. The silence before the question. You are not alone in that silence. And you do not have to stay in it. Thank you for staying with me through every candle, every spreadsheet row, every midnight timestamp, and every mile of that dark road past Falls Lake. If this story made you feel something, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be the one person you should not have? I read every single comment. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story tonight, share it. Sometimes one story is all it takes to help someone start paying attention.